My name is Catherine Williams. I'm 67 years old, and for 20 years I've been burying my granddaughter alive. Not with my hands, not with dirt and stones, but with silence, with cowardice. With every sunrise, I chose to believe the easy version of the story. Emily was 16 when she vanished. Brown hair that caught fire in the summer light. Freckles scattered like constellations. A laugh that could crack open the hardest heart. It was August 2005. We lived in Tybee Island, Georgia, one of those forgotten coastal towns where the air tastes like salt and regret, where everybody knows your business but nobody tells the truth. Emily disappeared on a Saturday night. There was a bonfire at the beach. She went with her best friend, Sarah Mitchell, 2 girls in summer dresses, barefoot and fearless, walking into the dark. Only one came back. Sarah was found 3 days later, half drowned, screaming nonsense about the water and the men and the music that wouldn't stop. They said she'd had a psychotic break. Drugs, maybe. Trauma, definitely. She never spoke Emily's name again. The police searched. We all searched. Divers went into the ocean. Bloodhounds tracked scents that ended at the shoreline. Helicopters circled like mechanical vultures. For 6 months, my son Michael, Emily's father, held press conferences, made pleas on local TV, printed flyers with her face smiling back at a world that had already moved on. And then, nothing. The case went cold. The detectives stopped calling. Michael remarried and moved to Atlanta. Sarah's family left town, and Tybee Island swallowed the story whole, like it swallows everything. Tied in, tied out, nothing but sand and forgetting. But I never forgot. I stayed in the same house, slept in the same bed, walked the same beach where my granddaughter was last seen alive. Every morning, I'd watch the sunrise over the Atlantic, the water turning gold, and I'd wonder if she was down there somewhere, watching the same light. And every single night for 20 years, I heard her voice in my dreams asking me the same question. Grandma, why didn't you look for me? 20 years later, I'm 67 and my body's breaking down like driftwood left too long in the sun. Arthritis in my hands, a heart that skips beats like it's trying to escape my chest. The doctors say stress. I say guilt. I live alone now. Michael calls twice a year, Christmas and my birthday, and those conversations are surgical, polite, brief, painless. He doesn't ask about Emily, neither do I. We've both learned the language of avoidance, but last Tuesday, everything changed. I was at the grocery store, Piggly Wiggly on Butler Avenue, when I saw her, Sarah Mitchell. After 20 years, she was standing in the cereal aisle, older but unmistakable. Same haunted eyes, same way of holding herself like she might shatter. Our eyes met. She dropped the box of Cheerios. It hit the floor, and I swear to God the sound echoed like a gunshot. She turned and ran, actually ran out of the store, leaving her cart in the middle of the aisle. I followed her. I don't know why. My legs just moved. My heart hammered so hard, I thought I'd collapse right there in the parking lot, but I kept going, calling her name, until she stopped beside a rusted Civic and spun around, tears streaming down her face. Please, she whispered, please don't make me go back there. Go back where? I asked. To the truce. And then she said the words that detonated my life. Emily didn't drown, Mrs. Williams. She was killed, and your son knows who did it. She got in her car and drove away, leaving me standing there in the Georgia heat, the world tilting beneath my feet. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in Emily's old bedroom untouched since 2005, a shrine to a ghost. Her posters were still on the walls, Paramore and Fall Out Boy, bands she'd loved with the fierce devotion only teenagers can muster. Her bookshelf held dog-eared copies of Twilight and the Perks of Being a Wallflower. Her closet still smelled like her perfume, some cheap fruity thing from Bath and Body Works that she'd worn every single day. I touched her pillow. It still had the faded grape juice stain from the night she laughed so hard she couldn't breathe. All this time, I'd been grieving an accident, a terrible random tragedy. The ocean took her, I'd told myself. But it wasn't the ocean, it was men. Monsters who saw 2 young girls and decided they were disposable. And my son knew. My Michael, who I'd raised to be good, to be honest. He'd known, and he'd chosen silence. Chosen money over his daughter. I made a decision that night. If the police wouldn't find the truth, I would. I was 67 years old, and I had nothing left to lose. But I could still do one thing. I could make them pay. The next morning I drove to Sarah's apartment. It took me 3 hours to find her. When she opened the door, she looked like she'd been expecting me. "Come in," she said quietly. Inside, her apartment was bare. No photos, no decorations, just survival. She made tea with shaking hands, and we sat across from each other like two soldiers from the same war. "Tell me everything," I said, and she did. That night at the bonfire, there were older men there, not kids, men. Friends of my son Michael's business partner, a man named David Brennan. David owned a construction company, had money, connections, the kind of wealth that buys silence and erases mistakes. He threw parties for wealthy clients, private parties. Emily and Sarah weren't supposed to be there, but David saw them on the beach. Two pretty girls in summer dresses. He invited them up to the house, said there was better music, better drinks, famous people. Sarah remembered feeling special, remembered thinking this was the kind of night they'd talk about for years. David bought them drinks, fancy cocktails with fruit and umbrellas. Sarah remembered laughing, remembered the bonfire getting brighter, the music getting louder, the world starting to spin in ways that didn't make sense. And then everything went black. When she woke up, she was in the water, drowning, her lungs filled with salt. Someone had dumped her in the ocean, left her for dead. She crawled to shore, barely alive, her mind shattered into pieces she'd spent 20 years trying to put back together. And Emily? Sarah's voice broke, and tears ran down her face, cutting tracks through makeup that couldn't hide the damage underneath. Emily fought back. One of the men got violent. And Emily, my beautiful, brave Emily, she fought like hell. But she was 16 and small and surrounded by predators. She fell, hit her head on the stone fireplace. Sarah saw it happen, saw the blood, saw Emily's eyes go empty before they threw Sarah into the water to drown. David Brennan covered it up, paid off witnesses, got rid of the body. And my son Michael, Sarah said, knew everything. He'd been there that night, not at the bonfire, but at the house where it all went wrong. He saw them take the girls, and he did nothing. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" I asked. She looked at me with eyes that had seen hell. "I tried, Mrs. Williams. I tried to tell the police, but David had people everywhere. The detective on the case, Officer Harris, he was on David's payroll. They threatened my family, said if I talked, my little brother would disappear too. So I stayed quiet, and I've been dying inside ever since. I left Sarah's apartment with a fire in my chest I hadn't felt in 20 years. Rage, pure, burning rage. I drove to Atlanta that night. Didn't pack a bag. Didn't tell anyone where I was going. Just got in my car and drove, hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. The highway stretched out forever, and with every mile, I felt myself changing. The mother who'd raised Michael, who'd loved him, who'd believed in him, she died somewhere around Macon. By the time I reached Atlanta, I was someone new. I showed up at Michael's house at midnight, pounding on the door until his new wife, Jennifer, opened it in her silk robe, confused and terrified. "Where is he?" I demanded. "Mom?" Michael appeared behind her and I barely recognized him. Expensive suit even at midnight, silver at his temples, designer watch, the look of a man who'd sold his soul and bought a nice life with the proceeds. "We need to talk," I said. He tried to close the door. I wedged my foot in. "Mom, you need to leave. You're not well." "Not well?" I laughed and it sounded like glass breaking. "You let your daughter die, Michael. You let them kill her and you covered it up." His face went white. Jennifer gasped. Michael grabbed my arm and pulled me inside, practically dragged me into his pristine living room with its leather furniture and abstract art and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Atlanta like he was king of the whole damn world. "How do you know?" he whispered. "Sarah told me everything, and now you're going to tell me your part." He tried to deny it at first, claimed Sarah was crazy, that I was believing the delusions of a damaged woman, but I just stared at him, waited, and finally he broke. He cried, actually cried, tears running down his face, snot dripping from his nose, ugly crying like a child who knows he's been caught. Told me he'd been at David's house that night for a business meeting, saw the girls arrive, saw them drugged, saw Emily fight, saw her fall, and he did nothing. Called David instead of 911, helped dispose of evidence, lied to police, lied to me, all because David threatened to destroy his business, ruin his life. "I wanted to protect you," he sobbed. I didn't want you to know what happened. I stood up. My hands were steady for the first time in years. You are a monster, Michael, and so am I, forever believing you. I left his house and drove back to Tybee Island. But I didn't go home. I went to David Brennan's estate, a sprawling mansion on the north end of the island. I'd known where he lived for years. Everyone did. He was untouchable, wealthy, connected. I parked outside his gate and waited. At dawn, he came out for his morning run. 62 years old, still fit, still smiling like the world owed him everything. I stepped out of my car. David, I called. He stopped, looked at me with vague recognition. Catherine Williams, he said slowly. It's been a long time. You killed my granddaughter. He didn't deny it, didn't even flinch. That was an accident, a tragedy. But it's over, Catherine. It's been over for 20 years. It's not over, I said. Not until everyone knows what you did. He stepped closer, and his smile turned cold. No one will believe you. You're a grief-stricken old woman with no proof. I have lawyers. I have friends in the police, in the courts, in every institution that matters. You have nothing. I have the truth, I said, and he laughed. The truth doesn't matter, Catherine. It never did. That's when I made my decision. If the system wouldn't give me justice, I'd take it myself. I went home and spent 3 days planning. I wasn't a killer. I'd never even held a gun. I was a grandmother who baked cookies and watched Jeopardy and went to church on Sundays. But grief changes you. Injustice changes you. 20 years of silence and lies, watching the guilty walk free while your granddaughter stays buried. That changes you into something you don't recognize. I knew the island, knew the tides, knew the cliffs where the rocks are sharp and the water is deep. The same cliffs where they dumped Emily's body all those years ago. I studied David's routine, learned he ran every morning at dawn, learned he always went alone, learned he took the coastal path that ran right along the cliffs, where one wrong step could mean death, and everyone would call it an accident. I called David on the 3rd day, told him I wanted to meet, told him I had evidence, photographs that Sarah had kept hidden, documents proving what happened that night, told him if he didn't come alone, I'd go to the press, the FBI, everyone. He agreed. Of course he did. Men like him always think they can control the situation. We met at the cliffs at sunset, the same cliffs where Emily's body had been dumped 20 years ago. The sky was burning red and orange, like the world itself was on fire. Seagulls circled overhead, crying their mournful songs. David showed up in his Mercedes, alone, confident. Where's the evidence? He demanded. I looked at him, at this man who'd stolen my granddaughter's life and walked away clean, who'd lived 20 more years in his mansion while Emily rotted somewhere at the bottom of the ocean. There is no evidence, David. There's only this. I stepped toward him, and he laughed. What are you going to do, Catherine? Push me off the cliff? You're a 67-year-old woman. You think you're strong enough. Grief makes you strong, I said. Rage makes you strong. 20 years of carrying a dead child in your heart makes you stronger than you could ever understand. And then I moved, faster than I thought possible, used every ounce of strength I had left, every muscle, every desperate, furious ounce of will, and I shoved him backward, hard. He stumbled, shocked, his face finally showing something real, fear, the kind of fear Emily must have felt. He went over the edge, arms windmilling, mouth open in a scream that got swallowed by the wind. I heard him hit, heard the wet crunch of bones meeting rocks, heard the waves claim him, pulling him under like they'd pulled Emily under all those years ago. And then silence. Beautiful, perfect silence. I stood there for a long time, watching the ocean turn red with the setting sun. The wind whipped my hair around my face. Salt spray stung my eyes, or maybe it was tears. Before you embark on a journey of revenge, dig 2 graves. Confucius said that, or someone did. What matters is they were right. I walked to the edge and looked down at David's body broken on the rocks below. Waves already starting to pull him out to sea. 1 grave filled. I thought about going home. Thought about calling the police. Turning myself in. Thought about Sarah, about Michael, about all the people who'd stayed silent and let evil win. But I was tired. So tired. 67 years of living and 20 of those years spent in hell. My body hurt. My heart hurt. And Emily was down there somewhere, in the dark water, waiting. And then I stepped forward. Didn't hesitate. Didn't think. Just stepped off the edge, like I was stepping off a curb. The fall was shorter than I expected. The water was colder. My body hit the rocks. and pain exploded through me, bright and final and somehow clean, pure. I felt my ribs crack, felt my lungs fill with salt water and blood. But I also felt something else, relief, peace, the kind you only find when you've finally finished what you started, when you've balanced the scales even though it costs you everything. I thought about Emily, wondered if she'd forgive me for taking so long, wondered if she'd been watching all these years, from wherever souls go when they're torn from the world too soon, waiting for someone to care enough to make it right, waiting for justice in a world that had forgotten her name. Wondered if there was anything after this, some place where grandmothers and granddaughters who loved each other could meet again, some place where 16-year-old girls with freckles and summer dresses got to grow old, got to fall in love, got to have children of their own. The water pulled me under and I didn't fight it. I let it take me, let it carry me down to where Emily had been all along, waiting for someone to remember, waiting for someone to care, waiting for justice, even if it came too late. 2 graves, I thought, as the darkness closed in and the cold seeped into my bones. One for him, one for me, one for the monster who took her, one for the grandmother who loved her enough to make him pay. And finally, after 20 years of nightmares and guilt and questions without answers, I could rest. We both could. Emily and me, together at last, in the quiet dark water where no one could hurt us anymore. Before you judge me, ask yourself this. If someone you loved was taken from you, stolen in the cruelest way possible, if the people who did it walked free for 20 years, living their comfortable lives while you drowned in grief, if the system failed you and justice was just a word with no meaning, an empty promise in a world built to protect the powerful, what would you do? How far would you go? And when you're standing at that edge, looking down into the abyss with the weight of 2 decades pressing on your chest, would you have the courage to step forward? Or would you turn away and spend the rest of your life wondering if you were brave enough to love someone that much? Some questions don't have easy answers. Some wounds never heal. And sometimes the only justice left is the kind you make yourself. What would you do?